the analogy that I like to use is that MPD is basically like a stray dog that is running through our streets with rabies. And we are continuously just giving animal control like more money to like give the dog more rabies instead of putting a leash on the dog and like telling the dog like you have to stay inside. You can't keep biting people. You can't keep evicting unhoused people and destroying all of their stuff. You can't keep showing up to people's houses in the middle of the night and breaking in.
Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggle. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and today our guest is Jae Yates, who has been an activist for some time now in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, and he's an executive board member for the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression. He's also a member of the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice. He's a member of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and he's also the co-chair of the Taking Back Pride, which we'll talk about hopefully towards the end of this interview as we head into Pride Month. So first, I want to wish everybody as we head into June. It's a month of where we celebrate Pride, we celebrate Juneteenth Day, and it's a day of trying to celebrate and fight for the fights and struggles for freedom that we've had for different peoples, and it's also the beginning of the summer, and people can try to hopefully have a better attitude. We get some sunshine and stuff, but in these days of Donald Trump, it hasn't been all of that, and so we're coming upon the 5-year anniversary of the murder, or I should say execution, of George Floyd by the police in Minneapolis. And the National Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression called for protests and marches across the country, which if you're a reader of Fight Back News, you know that happened because they were reported on in that publication. But I want to ask you, Jay, to start out the interview, why did you call for these marches on the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd? Is it just we shouldn't forget this, or was this a victory lap, or was this something that we need to protest and fight because things are just as bad as they were? How do you view this 5 years, and why did you call for that march?
Yeah. So I think that one of the main reasons to call actions on the anniversary specifically in Minneapolis was actually that there wasn't anything. A lot of the forces that have kind of, I think, taken ownership over George Floyd's death, and who kind of see themselves as the main driver of action around it, weren't calling anything. And I think as somebody who both lives in Minneapolis and who lives literally in George Floyd Square, I think that was really odd to me. And I sort of am feeling this and observing this real amnesia from a lot of people about what happened 5 years ago. Not only do we have very little to show for the uprising in terms of actual substantive parameters on police behavior or substantive legislative reforms around police behavior, we also have this very strange recasting, right, of Tim Walz as this champion of justice around this case, and somebody who is really committed to combating racism in policing, when in reality he hasn't actually done any of those things, and in fact was the person who jeopardized hundreds of thousands of people who came out to protest, by calling the National Guard, by instituting the largest mass arrest in Minnesota history when the 646 protesters were trapped on a highway for, some of us, almost like 7 hours, while we're sandwiched between riot police training rifles on us and like armored vehicles and LRADs, you know? So it's sort of disingenuous to me, to act as though we've accomplished anything of substance around George Floyd's death. We still don't have any actual policy that requires Minneapolis police or most other police departments, I shouldn't say any other, but most other police departments around the country still aren't even required to have body cams on. It's only sort of like public pressure and like the honor system. We actually, in Minneapolis, we still don't actually have a ban on no-knock warrants. The mayor signed one, but there have already been tons of exceptions. One example that's happened recently is we had actually a case through the Communities United Against Police Brutality organization that we work with at times, had a case with a single mother living in the north side of Minneapolis who had her home literally invaded by MPD officers in the middle of the night, because their dog got out. And when neighbors called animal control called the police, and the police, literally on the pretense of thinking that her youngest child was like not breathing, when they like looked into their windows again in the middle of the night, used that as a pretense to literally invade her home. And she woke up with MPD pointing guns at her and her children. Like, these are still things that are happening on the regular. And Minnesota has this real amnesia about the uprising specifically, and like what we actually got out of it. Not what people feel we got out of it, or sort of the hearts and minds that were changed, but materially, what is actually different about policing practices in Minneapolis in particular. And my answer is very, very little.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's quite an indictment. It was recently. We've had Trump talking about potentially even pardoning Derek Chauvin, who was the one who killed George Floyd. Could you comment on that, and what people's thoughts in the Twin Cities are, but or even around the country, because as you're on the executive board of the National Alliance, what are people's reactions to that kind of thing when they hear that?
Yeah, specifically reacting to Derek Chauvin's pardon. I think most people thought that was absolutely ridiculous. One, in some activist circles, people actually were kind of like, look, if Donald Trump wants to pardon Derek Chauvin and put him in a state prison to get stabbed again, like, that's his prerogative, but that's demonstrably what's going to happen. Not only because people in Minneapolis see Derek Chauvin rightfully as sort of this symbol of everything that is wrong about policing in Minneapolis, but that Derek Chauvin had an insanely long list of misconduct, of abuse, of other murders. And so, he's an incredibly hated police officer. So pardoning him actually doesn't help him. However, symbolically, pardoning Derek Chauvin would be absolutely devastating to anybody who cares about policing and justice, but in particular to Black people. Because, like I said, Derek Chauvin is a symbol of what Black people prior to George Floyd had been desperately trying to get the rest of the population of America to understand, that this is how we are treated all the time, whether anybody notices or not. And so I think that most people's reaction to the pardoning was just disbelief, really, and disgust from a lot of people, at least on the left and at least in Black communities. Out when we're collecting petition signatures for community control of the police, sometimes we did get people who were kind of like, well, like, he's kind of served his time, hasn't he? Like, doesn't he, like, hasn't he, like, paid enough lumps for, like, murdering someone in the middle of the street? And it's like, no. There is no payment high enough for lynching a Black man over an alleged counterfeit bill, actually. That there's nothing that justifies this level of violence being visited on our communities. There's no crime statistic that you can cite to me that makes it fine to live in a reality where a police officer can publicly kill a Black man and face no consequences, or even have his sentence pardoned, even though he did it, even though it's on video. And I think that, like, also the pardon for a lot of Black folks stands in really stark contrast to the execution of Marcellus Williams, who was wrongfully incarcerated, I believe, I think it was like 30 years or something, and had all of this evidence that proved he didn't do it, that completely exonerated him. And not only did no one in the federal government step in to stop this execution, but the governor of Missouri was just kind of like, well, I don't want to pardon this man. It wasn't about, like, thinking that he was actually guilty. It wasn't about, like, justice in the case or anything like that. It was literally just, it's easier for me to murder this Black man for a crime I know he didn't commit than to just admit that we made a mistake and that he shouldn't have been in jail in the first place. And so I think that the contrast of that for a lot of Black people is impossible to stomach. And I think that we also think that it should be impossible for everyone else to stomach. Because if we can be treated this way, so can you. If you can be called a criminal for anything with no evidence and jailed for the rest of your life over it, like, that can happen to you too. And so, I just think that it's absolutely disgusting to send the message both to police officers that they have license to do what Derek Chauvin did, and also to Black people that, like, here is us telling you that, like, your lives mean nothing. That, like, the fact that this man killed a Black man in broad daylight and had a record of doing the same thing multiple times doesn't matter. I think that's incredibly psychologically damaging.
Yeah. I want to take you back, 5 years ago, because I remember, when the video came out about George Floyd, and it was stunning. Of course, it was, you were watching in a video of somebody getting murdered, and the people that I think we had Marsha Howard on here a while, a year or two ago, who was with the Minneapolis Teachers Union, who lives in the same neighborhood you do, where he was murdered, and where George Floyd Square is right now. But that incident, tipped off protests across the country, because there had been, police murders across the country. People saw, Michael Brown in the St. Louis area, and going back, I think, to Trayvon Martin in Florida. So there was this, whatever, I think it was building up, but particularly in Minneapolis, the protests were big. They were strong. You burned down the police station, which is something I've never seen or heard about in my life as an activist, and I'm an old guy. And so and there was, here in Chicago, there was huge protests, and people were, there was, people breaking windows, and there were, the anger was high, and the Chicago, the National Alliance was the main national organization calling for national protests, had been doing it long before George Floyd was murdered, and had a program that they were putting forward, and in the aftermath of that, it seemed to me that politicians, were, especially the Democratic Party ones, were rushing, in big cities, were rushing to do cosmetic things, and to try to, oh, we're really with you or whatever, here, that wasn't even enough, but a couple of things similar, abuses by the police allowed us to pass a law called Empowering Communities for Public Safety, which gives some measure of election and accountability of the police. But can you talk a little bit about, what victories were won in the aftermath of this struggle? And, as the movement ebbed out a little bit, what you're fighting for right now, what you're hoping to accomplish?
Yeah. So specifically, like, what did we win in Minneapolis? Honestly, the main thing that I think came out of the uprising that was like a tangible win was really the burning down of the police precinct. And I say that because I think that was kind of the only thing that came out of it that actually sort of like hurt the police department, or like made them face like real consequences collectively for what, because the whole point of the uprising was that, like, Derek Chauvin is one cop in a long line of police officers in Minneapolis specifically that have murdered, harassed, and ruined the lives of hundreds of Black people. I mean, here people made this huge, made a lot of noise, right, about the officer who was killed last year. I can't remember his last name. His first name is Jamal. But he was killed responding to a call. And it's the first murder of any Minneapolis police officer in over 2 decades. And that got much more airtime than the fact that Minneapolis Police Department has killed over 400 people in that same amount of time. Like, the numbers just don't lie, but I think that here there was this real performative energy that took hold directly after the precinct was burned down. And I think that that's because lawmakers and politicians here realized, like, oh no, we might actually have to do real substantive police reform if people rally around that. For us, TCC for J was had just launched our kind of version of the ECPS ordinance. Actually, our legislation was based pretty heavily off of Chicago's legislation, and we talked to a lot of y'all about, like, how we should construct our legislation. And unfortunately, at the same time, there was a different kind of Democratic Party-backed initiative called Yes for Minneapolis, or Yes on 2. And essentially what it was this charter amendment to the Minneapolis Charter that changed the name of what the police officers were called from police officers to peace officers in our Constitution. It eliminated the minimum requirement for like hiring of officers. So, like, you have to have a certain number of officers employed for MPD. It removed that. And it established this commissioner position called the Commissioner of Public Safety that was supposed to be kind of like the arbiter of police reform. Now, the way this was talked about and marketed from take action and those kinds of forces was that this would abolish the police. We said from the beginning, that's not true. Your legislation doesn't do that. Changing the name of the police department and changing what officers are called is not abolition. And actually, this proposal does nothing to change the power relationship, right, between citizens and the police. But unfortunately, like, marketing is really powerful. And so, like, a lot of people really threw their weight behind Yes on Two. And then Yes on Two failed because they didn't talk to residents of North Minneapolis, which is where a lot of the Black and brown, but primarily Black population of Minneapolis lives. And is also sort of the area that is most kind of heavily over-policed and underserved, meaning that MPD heavily surveils North Minneapolis, but in terms of actually responding to calls and responding to emergencies that people in North Minneapolis have, their rates of response are absolutely abysmal. And so Yes on Two was incredibly unpopular in North Minneapolis because they were like, well, this doesn't address anything that we've been talking about this whole time. And so my analysis is that, unfortunately, that split kind of our forces and also made people lose a lot of faith in sort of municipal solutions to policing reform. We made it really clear that our goals are not actually to work with the police, but that the analogy that I like to use is that MPD is basically like a stray dog that is running through our streets with rabies. And we are continuously just giving animal control like more money to like give the dog more rabies instead of putting a leash on the dog and like telling the dog, like, you have to stay inside. You can't keep biting people. You can't keep evicting unhoused people and destroying all of their stuff. You can't keep showing up to people's houses in the middle of the night and breaking in. You can't keep responding to calls weeks and months later after people have submitted complaint after complaint, and you can't wait to do anything about it until the person has already, in the case of Davis Maturi, been shot by his racist neighbor. That was a situation basically where Davis Maturi is a Black man who lives in South Minneapolis, who was pruning a tree in his front yard when his racist white neighbor, who had been harassing him for months, and he had been calling MPD about him for months, finally just shot him in his front yard. And MPD took, I think it was 4 days to arrest this man.
Oh my God.
It's like we deserve better than this. We pay for the police to exist. But it's just, I think that for whatever reason, people are really uncomfortable thinking about what it means to leash the police, for lack of a better term. I think that a lot of white people here in particular are really afraid of, like, well, what happens though if I can't call the police every time I'm scared, every time that I have to interact with my Black and brown neighbors? What happens if I feel threatened by the person on the bus, or that I feel threatened by somebody walking on the street? Like, it's not based in the actual reality that the police not only don't respond to crime, but that they show up afterwards and do very little functionally to help you deal with the fact that you experienced a crime, and especially if you're not white. So yeah, I think that there's just like a lot to kind of unpack with Minneapolis in particular, and why people here are sort of so resistant to actual substantive reform. And, I don't want to get too far into it, but one thing that we got out of the uprising that I think is actually even more detrimental to us than it is helpful is the community commission on police oversight, which is the CCPO, which is basically a review board that was established by the Frye administration after like a few years after George Floyd's murder. I think it was established in 2022. And it's a literal, like, toothless, powerless review board that can issue recommendations to MPD, but can't tell them what to do whatsoever, and is basically a forum where community members go for at 2 minutes at a stretch to just like yell at the commissioners about things that they can't change. And so it's just sort of like this manufactured feeling of being able to control the police, feeling like there's been reform, when in reality things are exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean it's a problem. I mean, police are organized locally across the country, but the one thing they have in common across the country is that the community has little or no power. And if you don't have community control of the police, you often have police control of the community, and that's a problem. I wanted to ask you about, the movement, or sections of the movement have put efforts into a national bill called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and it's passed the United States House of Representatives, but has gotten stalled in the Senate, and with Trump and the current people sitting in the U.S. Senate, it might be dead. I'm not sure. But could you comment a little bit on what that bill is, what the strategy there was, and what your view of it is and what its future?
Yeah. So the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill was really grassroots organizations, and a few national organizations like the NAACP, some other kind of bigger, well-known names, but a lot of grassroots organization and pressure on specific Democrat politicians to draft a bill that did a number of things nationally around policing. A lot of it was centered around sort of increasing transparency in police departments across the U.S. By actually requiring officers to wear and have on their body camera. Things like making police officers install and have on dash cams. Things like banning the chokehold that was used to murder George Floyd and other similar chokeholds, which, by the way, are often taught to police officers via the deadly exchange with Israeli occupation forces. It did things like, I believe it banned no-knock warrants nationwide. I mean, it had a lot of kind of these common sense, right? Like reform measures that communities had been calling for decades. I remember the body camera discussion being a big part of the Philando Castile protests. And like
Philando Castile was murdered by the Minneapolis police, I believe, right?
Correct. Yeah.
A couple years before George Floyd.
Correct. That was in 2017. And yeah, I think that a lot of people, not to get too far into the weeds about Philando Castile's murder, but I think a lot of people thought that was going to be the one that would get us a lot of these common sense reforms, because Philando Castile's murder was so obviously unlawful and messed up. You know, he did everything right, and still got murdered. And so I think that actually his murder was sort of the catalyst for the George Floyd uprising, because I think when Geronimo Yanez got acquitted, like, people were shocked. I remember I was pretty involved in those protests. I had just moved to Minneapolis. And I remember just like abject horror and disbelief from a lot of people. And I think that like George Floyd's murder really was the straw that broke the camel's back here. But yeah, the George Floyd Justice and Policing bill has been more or less killed through both the sort of Democrat Party's obsession, I think, with powerlessness, and also just like a refusal of the Republican Party to like even acknowledge that like police violence is a real issue that needs to have anything done about it. And in terms of like the executive order that Trump issued, which is called something buck wild and really long, like unleashing law enforcement.
I got it. I got it here. It's worth reading because it's
Yeah.
Oh my God. Strengthening and unleashing America's law enforcement to pursue criminals and protect innocent citizens. That's the name of his executive order. But I was going to ask you about that next, and so that's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
Of the liberals. Couldn't get anything through, even a modest bill like the George Floyd Act, and Trump's response is to just issue an executive order that is, off the chain. And maybe you can comment on that as well, on the executive order.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the executive order seeks to not only undo everything that the George Floyd Justice and Policing Bill did, which I just have to say, like, none of the things in that bill were like radical or controversial at all. It was like, here is this bill that like actually forces police officers to do things that they've been telling us they already do. Like police officers were already supposed to be wearing body cameras. Police officers are already not supposed to use submission holds. Like these things are not radical propositions. And then the executive order undoes all of those and then like gives the police these incredibly dangerous sweeping powers that essentially like keep them from being beholden to the law in any way. I think one of the things that it adds is like it strengthens qualified immunity essentially, and keeps that from being like basically you can't prosecute a cop for pretty much anything. It also does things like adds funding for like federal funding for police to have even more unfettered and unregulated access to military equipment, which again they already do. So I can't even express honestly how horrible the executive order is, and as much of a slap in the face it is to Black people who have watched our family members, our friends, just brutally killed or wrongfully incarcerated by police for our entire lives. Yeah, I mean, like, I was, 6 the first time that my parents talked to me about how to interact with police officers. Like this is a reality that permeates every aspect of being a Black person in this country. And so I really feel that I'm hoping that more Black people are able to kind of break out of the understandable pattern of despair that I think a lot of folks are in, of like, we fought so hard for so long. We've had this civil rights movement. We've had all of these uprisings around specific murders, and like people just don't care that we're getting killed. And I think that I want people to step out of that and realize that actually there are a lot more people that think that this current system is insane, for lack of a better word. That like it's insane to think that some of the most notoriously murderous police departments on earth that are like internationally recognized as violating the human rights of people regularly, such that other countries have to comment on it, that they need any unleashing. Like it's not in line with reality. And so I think I'm hoping that the fear of what that means, the fear of what it could mean in terms of our ability to protest and resist, I hope that people are able to push past that and realize that like there are common sense things that we can do to curtail the police's ability to harm and oppress us if we can only grasp them, if we can only unite long enough to achieve those things. And I truly think that community control of the police is that thing. There's a reason why Black communities have been fighting for that since Reconstruction. Um, it's not only our right, but it's also the only sane response to a police department that was quite literally founded on slavery and white supremacy. So yeah, I'm hoping that we can mount some sort of opposition to the executive order, if not also like get the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act passed.
Yeah, yeah, no, thank you for that. I guess speaking of white supremacy, I wanted to dig into Donald Trump a little bit more here. The when Trump got elected, and the larger numbers of working people voted for him this time than in his last election against Biden, and he was running against a black woman, but larger numbers of people of color and even black people voted for Trump, and some of it was the issues that was going on in Palestine. I think more of it was the economy. Um, but clearly people didn't expect all the attacks against working class people, unions, etc. But especially people of color, and that's what I wanted to dig into a little bit here with you. Um, when Trump first took office, he appointed Matthew J. I'm going to say his last name wrong. Veta, I think his last name is, but he's the Office of Management Budget. He's the head of that, and he was under the first Trump administration. And he's written big chunks of this 2025 report that the Heritage Foundation put out that it's gotten a lot of press. But what he did was, and Trump did, with him, was they froze all the money that was going to poor and working people right from the start, and they started attacking, universities and institutions for DEI, which stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they talk about woke and their attack on cultural Marxism, but it's attacks on programs that are teach Black history or whatever. It seems like the only discrimination they're fighting for is to hire more white people in different places. And as a Black person, that's a leader of a national organization and a local organization that you're active in. How do you see all this attack on DEI and how Trump is treating Black people in general?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of how I think the DEI part factors in, here's the thing. Unfortunately, Trump and Republicans understand their base in a way that I think Democrats simply don't bother to try to do, which is that white people are incredibly anxious about this shift, really, to actually hold them accountable, not just for the past, but for the ways that they benefit from how society has been constructed for the benefit of white people. And that, to an extent, does include working class people, just not in the way that they think. Working class people are absolutely harmed by white supremacy because what white supremacy is a lie meant to divide the working class, meant to keep white people from seeing that like your class interest actually does not align with the people who are telling you that Black people are inferior, that they're dirty, that they're evil, that they're criminals. Like this is actually them cloaking their oppression of you and the exploitation of you. But what you do get out of it as a working class white person is a social capital, right? That like other groups of people can't access. You don't have certain barriers as a white person to living your daily life that black and brown people do. It's less that you I think the way that we've talked about privilege maybe has contributed to this problem, because I think it's not so much that white people have privileges, it's that they have a lack of barriers to a lot of things. Like you don't have to live your life worrying and planning around the threat of police violence. You simply don't. Black people have to do that. Like every black person I know has Turn Signal now, which is that app that was created by a black tech developer and a lawyer for people to like have legal support when they're getting stopped by the police. And so like I think that how all of that relates to this DEI question is that because a lot of working class white people's experience is that of the working class, obviously, they are averse to the idea that they could possibly have advantages in society, that they could possibly have a historical precedence, right, for literally living in a different reality, under different laws, under different material circumstances than their black and brown counterparts. So I think that a lot of this is basically just a temper tantrum. You've been telling me that like I benefit from white supremacy and I don't like that. So here's the backlash. Here's me. I'm going to erase Black history from as many places as I can. And not just Black history. I'm going to erase the accomplishments of women. I'm going to remove any mention of the trans people that actually championed the Stonewall Uprising and subsequent political efforts to gain equal rights for queer people. I'm going to erase any evidence of the crimes of white supremacy and slavery because it makes me uncomfortable. So I think that that's a lot of where this is coming from. I think a lot of white folks, unfortunately, are tired of hearing about like the ways that they benefit from and contribute to white supremacy. And I think that the Trump administration understood that and took steps to give their base what they wanted. And like I said, like obviously I know that it doesn't actually benefit them in the long run, that like Trump is not a working class hero. That's ridiculous. And that also most of these things have absolutely nothing to do with Marxism. Like that a lot of like critical race theory doesn't even have sort of like a critique of capitalism, actually. So I think that a lot of it is just people's fears and anxieties being capitalized on for political gain by a ruling class right-wing party. I also think that like this is exactly why we do things like Taking Back Pride, because we knew that Target doesn't actually care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. The only reason that they even created that program was to avoid backlash and accountability for having racist hiring practices, for getting caught discriminating against Black and brown employees, for getting caught funding incredibly anti-LGBTQ initiatives around the country. they only did it because they got caught. It's not because they actually care about this issue. And so when the rollback happened, we were like, we told you so. We told you this would happen, that these corporations that sort of brand themselves as DEI of any kind, it's not about actually creating opportunities for marginalized people. It's about providing cover so that they can continue to do what companies do, which is extract and exploit their employees. So, yeah, I think it's frustrating that like something that's so obviously like manufactured culture war crap is sort of being bought by a lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's well said. I mean, I think we have, we have some struggle ahead of us here. I mean, my view is that white workers are being exploited. If they weren't, people wouldn't hire them. That's the whole point of having them work for these corporations, is that they can make more money off of them. And of course, black and brown workers are exploited even more because they're subjects of national oppression, and so there's a super exploitation. But there's a basis for us to come together and to end all exploitation. And I think it's on us as organizers and activists, and that includes all you Fight Back Radio listeners out there, to try to to give people a vision of a better world that we can come to. So.
If I can quickly add too, like,
Sure.
Knowing what I know about labor history, and like, people will ask me a lot, like, why don't more Black people join unions? And I'm like, because white people organized to keep them out of them, because white people refused to have solidarity with Black and brown workers. Like, that's just the reality of the labor movement in the US in a lot of places. And like, that's like what I'm saying about white supremacy hurts white people, that there would have been a lot more success and I think a lot more power behind the labor movement had we been able to unite across racial lines, and sort of see what was happening clearly, like you described, as like, we're both being exploited. that we're being exploited by the same people. If we fight them together, like, we'll be more successful. But unfortunately, I think that racism and white supremacy are really effective forms of propaganda, because they allow white people to abdicate responsibility for history, and yeah, sort of lull them into this false sense of like, I'm protected by this system when they're not. So I absolutely agree with you, that like, white workers are absolutely exploited. But the solution to that is solidarity, and joining with the demands of your fellow Black and brown workers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
To see people do that.
No, absolutely. Well, I think the most successful industrial unions, have done that, and the ones that, the old, trade craft unions tended not to do that. Some of them are starting to wake up, and some of them aren't. Yeah. But that's our struggle that we have to fight with our sisters and brothers to have the broadest possible unity and realize who our real enemies actually are. So I appreciate that. Thank you, Jay. You mentioned the Taking Back Pride in the LGBTQ, and I wanted to get into that a little bit as well. You're the co-chair of Taking Back Pride in the Twin Cities. And can you talk a little bit about, I know maybe just for people that aren't aware of it, a little bit about the history of Pride. I mean, it starts with the Stonewall riots in New York and commemorating that, which was really a militant, let's stand up and fight back moment for the LGBTQ movement. And then, it's become corporatized in a lot of ways. And some of the more progressive left wing started doing take back pride kind of things. And I was wondering, we talked only for a minute before we hit record on in this interview, but I'm curious because now Trump's attacking even that, and you see, like you mentioned, the Target department stores and these people that are rolling over, all of them pretty much, are like, oh, we're for pride. Oh, no, we're not, but how do you view that? And what are you trying to accomplish this year in the Twin Cities? And what's your advice for people that are trying to do, how should we be approaching pride as we enter June around the country?
Yeah. So I hope you're ready for a really long answer. Mostly
no, go ahead.
like
Big question. I should have broken it down a little more, maybe, but go ahead.
Yeah, to speak first to the Stonewall Uprising, I mean, actually, in terms of historical resistance in the queer community against police violence, the critical context around Stonewall that I think a lot of people are missing is that police brutality was a regular part of life for queer people long before the Stonewall Uprising. You have some really famous uprisings in California with the Cooper Donuts riot, where essentially police raided this like late night cafe and were trying to force people to show their IDs to prove that they're actually allowed to be wearing pants or a dress or whatever. And the patrons got sick of it and like threw hot coffee at the cops. And then Cooper Donuts was like, yeah, we don't really like LGBTQ people anymore. And sort of that was a big reason why it closed. There's the Eagle in Chicago that was raided, I think in 1963, if I remember right. And so like there's actually a long history of LGBTQ, like small uprisings, right, against police violence in America. And the Stonewall uprising was really the culmination of all of those other uprisings. I think the thing that is most important to me about the Stonewall Uprising of 1969 is that it was explicitly anti-capitalist. Like Sylvia Rivera literally had not only the speech that she gives at the first Pride, where she's essentially telling off cis white gay men and women about their transphobia and really taking them to task over it. But in subsequent years, she has multiple interviews where she talks about how Pride had already become this like bloated kind of corporate parade with no politics and no real kind of liberatory messaging behind it. And I think that across the country, Pride has become exactly what she and other activists wanted to avoid. I think that a lot of the Stonewall Uprising exposed for queer people in a way that they maybe hadn't experienced collectively, that like, oh, the problem is capitalism, that like the police are protecting a certain way of life. They're trying to protect a specific image of American life and like family life that benefits capitalists, that doesn't benefit me, that doesn't account for the ways that I live my life. And so, yeah, I think that that's one reason why we do Taking Back Pride, is that not only has Stonewall sort of been sanitized and whitewashed, for a lack of a better term. And actually, I do mean that literally. I don't know if you know about, there was like this movie that came out, I think in like 2018 or something, where they literally recast like the actual black and brown trans people that led the Stonewall Uprising as white men, like as white gay men. So like, it's like the erasure has been happening for a while. But I think that the main thing that the Stonewall uprising showed is that the problem is capitalism. And instead of kind of taking that lesson, we have hyper capitalism like pride. Um, Here in Minneapolis, the main catalyst for taking back Pride was, like I was talking about earlier, the murder of Philando Castile in 2017, and much later in no, sorry. Philando Castile was murdered in 2016, and Geronimo Yanez was acquitted in 2017. And a lot of the people in the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice, which was called the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar at the time, um, uh, are queer. And so they were like, I am not okay with my identity and the legacy of this thing that really spearheaded and started the equal rights movement for queer people. It's also sort of providing cover for racist policing. It's saying, your police department just murdered a man in front of his girlfriend and child, but it's totally okay for you to march with us in this parade, And so, like, that's really where the first Taking Back Pride came from. And it was really ill received, honestly, by the kind of white suburban queer population that comes from outside of the cities to come to Pride in Minneapolis. People got booed. I wasn't there, but like apparently people had things thrown at them. And TCC for J also attempted to talk to the organizers of Pride and were, pretty soundly rebuffed and ignored. So we've been doing the Taking Back Pride March every year since. And our demands have largely been the same the whole time, which is cops have no place being at an explicitly anti-police event, and that corporations similarly have no place at an explicitly anti-capitalist event. And that if you are going to use the legacy of Stonewall, like you need to actually know and platform the ethos behind that uprising. Um, in recent years, we've really worked hard to add political education to our programming leading up to Taking Back Pride, since it's on June 28th, like the day of the big Pride Parade. About 600,000 people come to that in Minneapolis. And we found that it was incredibly important for us to educate people on the actual history of this, since TC Pride and like broader society doesn't educate people about that. Yeah, so I think that we had a lot of success in
So the
2020 with
rainbow flag and Budweiser beer isn't enough education, or whatever,
no,
or
actually,
whatever it is.
Raytheon slapping a rainbow on their logo does not make them less of a like genocide profiteer weapons company, like stuff like that. And it's surprising how little a lot of queer people know about our history. It's sad. And I think that like a lot of that has to do with not only how the AIDS epidemic affected the queer community and literally robbed us of a generation of people, but it also I think, yeah, created sort of a break between some of these historical realities that a lot of people just don't remember anymore. Yeah, so that's like a little bit about why we do Taking Back Pride, and some of the stuff we do within that. What was your other question?
No, I mean that was basically it. I was, trying to get a sense of, how you approached, taking, the Taking Back Pride, as right now you got Donald Trump who's attacking, even, the bourgeois, or the official Pride parades, and is
Yeah,
saying that that's woke and that's Marxist, cultural Marxism and stuff like that.
yeah,
And so, maybe there's more of a basis for unity with those folks, maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that like for our pride, and I think this is true of a lot of like municipal prides across the country, it's like the whole thing is completely devoid of any of that. And it's specifically because they've chosen to prioritize corporations and corporate comfort over like reality. Which, and the reality is that a lot of these corporations that slap a logo on, for like slap a rainbow on their logo for Pride Month, literally donate to super PACs that work towards conversion therapy, that work to sponsor bathroom bills, to criminalize any sort of like queer existence in public. And so we're saying like you can't have it both ways. Like you can't say that you're for the community and platform people that harm us the rest of the year. You can't say that you have these values of like diversity and like caring about our immigrant community and caring about our Black community when you bring a company like Wells Fargo as your main sponsor. I mean, the TC Pride Festival this year literally invited the Salvation Army to have a booth at Pride, which for people that don't know, the Salvation Army is notorious for being anti-queer. They've sponsored tons of anti-queer legislation, and they've literally killed queer people by denying them shelter beds across the country. Like, it's like the cognitive dissonance, right, of like a lot of these corporate run sort of nonprofit pride parades. It's just so obviously not about any real kind of rooting in what the point of this is, which is liberation. Like, people didn't start doing pride celebrations for like assimilation. Like, Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson did not care about assimilating into like cis het society. They cared about um, fighting their own oppression and actually forcing people to respect them, whether they want to or not. So I think that, like, for me, it's just so insulting to like see those figures and to see that history used to basically give like white twinks like an excuse to day drink in the park, you know? I think that we deserve better than that. And so we have been taking those demands directly to TC Pride in our city, and I think a lot of people um, on the in leftist circles, but also like in queer circles in particular, are more and more kind of feeling that cognitive dissonance between like this pride parade is saying that it supports me, but like they're platforming and they're funded by all of these companies that are very open about not supporting me the rest of the time.
Yeah, it's outrageous. Yeah, thank you for that. That's helpful. I want to. Unfortunately, our time is running out here a little bit, and you're a fascinating guest, and so I could keep feeding you questions for some time. But before we end the interview, I want to give you the opportunity to, if there's anything we didn't raise here, any points you want to make, or anything you want to message or request, or our Fight Back Radio listeners are activists. I believe are open to activism. So if there's anything that's going on you want to call their attention to, now would be a good time to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that I've been both like confronting in real life and thinking a lot about is the like real lack of unity that I'm observing in some spaces of oppressed nationalities, like particularly in my own community, in the Black community, of like this sense that like, oh, we need to separate, right, the struggle for queer liberation and the struggle for Black liberation, because they're not the same, you know. Like, it's really disrespectful to conflate those two. Which, like, my response is there is no separation. I can't stop being Black, like, to go fight for queer liberation and then like come back and like zip my skin back on. Like it's just like I think there's no liberation for Black people so long as queer Black people are not included. And if we're talking about decolonizing ourselves and sort of all of this kind of metaphysical pseudo spiritualist rhetoric, part of that has to include the reality that white people didn't invent queer culture. They did not invent being queer. We did. Like there are over 200 different words across different dialects on the African continent that describe non-binary genders, that describe, people that don't follow traditional heterosexual like marriage norms. And so like I just think that so long as we allow white supremacy to create these artificial divisions between our struggles and these artificial divisions between like who is oppressing us, who is creating these situations for exploitation, we have to confront homophobia and we have to confront transphobia every time that it comes up in our communities, because I'm really observing a real inability for cisgender heterosexual Black folks at times to unite on the basis that like I don't want to like unite with those people. I don't want to have a movement where Black queer people are included. And so I think as long as we allow white supremacy to do that to us, like we are going to have a real hard time uniting the working class and uniting an element of the working class that, in my opinion, leads in almost every arena of struggle. Queer and trans people are everywhere and are often the most advanced activists that we have. And so long as we are alienated from our own communities, I think that it's going to be incredibly difficult, bordering on impossible, to confront the realities of capitalism in decline. So I really encourage people who are not LGBTQ, who are not, honestly, who aren't women, who aren't, who don't hold different marginalized identities, to really think about like, how can I foster unity in my work? How can I help people work through these kinds of, like, I guess I would call them generational baggage, maybe, of like things that are kind of keeping our different movements from kind of unity of purpose. Because I just think that we are all rapidly approaching a time where we're going to have to confront fascism. We're going to have to confront white nationalism, and we can't be ready to do that so long as we're not engaged in radical solidarity with each other. So I think that's kind of like the last thing that I would say. And also that like we have to seize material solutions where we can and not get so caught up in like, metaphysics of like, does it make me feel better about living in a police state, or does it like actually like strike blows against the police state? We have to start thinking in practical terms and fighting for practical solutions if we're going to make gains. So.
No, that makes sense. That's a good way to end it. Solidarity, unity, and coming up with strategies based on the real situations that we have to face and the real struggles. So, yeah, thank you very much for that. Thank you for being our guest on Fight Back Radio, Jay. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, what a perfect guest, Jae Yates, for heading into Pride Month and also the month of Juneteenth Day. If you want to take a stab or poke Trump in the eye, read up on Juneteenth Day. This is, a lot of people think that slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, but it wasn't until General Granger went into Texas and in Galveston pronounced from the Union Army said, hey, look, we got guns here and slavery's over. And so that was June 19th, 1865. And so we celebrate that. But study up, read, they're trying to hide Black history or LGBTQ history. Don't let them do it. There's books out there. Let's read them. Let's tell people about it. Let's continue to tell the stories. And most importantly, let's continue to organize and fight back. So celebrate Juneteenth Day. And let's take back pride, like they're doing in the Twin Cities, like Jay told us, and read the history of Stonewall if you don't know it already, and the fights there, and some of the other fights that Jay told us about. Harry Hay, I think there's a biography of him, which I recommend to a lot of people as well, as one of the early leaders of the LGBTQ movement. So these are important things that we can do. So be active in June, be active year-round, and we'll put the National Alliance for Racist and Political Repression, we'll put their contact info in the show notes so that people can find them there. So I want to finally thank our production team, Kaitana Silvaro, Fayani Aboma Mahana, Shane Tremley, Dodd McColgan, Lane Dorsey, Vince Olson, and Natalie Pranis. And I'm Richard Berg for the entire Fight Back Radio team, saying until next time, all power to the people.